1280 AD. While Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages, African kings in Benin were casting bronze sculptures so sophisticated that when Europeans first saw them in 1897, they refused to believe Africans made them. Picture this: bronze art cast 3 millimeters thin, thinner than anything Renaissance masters could achieve. Streets 120 feet wide, wider than Fifth Avenue in New York City. Underground drainage systems, advanced urban planning. Walls so smooth Dutch visitors said they shined like mirrors. This was Benin City. This was Africa. This was your ancestors. And then the British came. In 7 days they burned it all, murdered hundreds, stole between 3,000 and 5,000 treasures worth billions of dollars. And for over 100 years they hid this from every single textbook. They told you Africa had no civilization. They lied. They told you Africans had no technology. They lied. They told you your ancestors were primitive. That was the biggest lie of all. Why did they burn every history book? Why did they steal every artifact? Why did they murder every witness? Because Benin Empire from the 13th to 17th century was a commercial powerhouse with underground drainage systems walls stretching 3,200 kilometers and bronze art that surpassed anything Europe could produce. By 1897, Benin City had wealth that made European capitals jealous. Palaces with walls smoother than Dutch mirrors. Bronze art cast with precision Europeans couldn't match. Art so perfect that when British museum experts first examined it, they concluded Africans couldn't have made it. They said Portuguese traders must have taught them. Another lie to protect their narrative. But here is the truth they buried. This isn't ancient history. This is your stolen inheritance. This is the proof your ancestors were kings. This is why they fear you knowing the truth. What happened next will change how you see Africa and yourself forever. By the end of this video, you will know 3 truths they buried. Truth number 1. Benin Empire had bronze casting technology in the 1200s, 300 years before Europe's Renaissance. Truth number 2. British didn't just collect art. They massacred hundreds. They burned an empire. They looted treasures worth over $2 billion in today's money. Truth number 3. Western museums still hold between 3,000 and 5,000 Benin bronzes hostage to hide African greatness, and you'll understand why they're terrified of returning them. This isn't about ancient Africa. This is about your bloodline. This is about the empire your ancestors built while Europe lived in darkness. This is about the wealth they stole, wealth that should be yours today. This is about the lies they told to justify colonization, slavery, and the theft that still happens today. Your poverty isn't your fault. Your struggle isn't because you're inferior. It's because they stole an empire. Your great-great-grandparents may have walked streets paved with prosperity. Your ancestors created art that still baffles metallurgists today. You carry the DNA of bronze kings, rulers who traded with Portugal, dominated West African commerce, and built civilizations. After this video, you'll never see a museum the same way again. You'll see them for what they are: vaults of stolen African glory. Let me take you back to where it all began. The year is 1180 AD. The Edo people are tired of their current rulers. They send a message to the city of Ife asking for help. They want a new leader, someone who can unite them, someone with royal blood and divine authority. The people of Ife send Prince Oranmiyan. He arrives in Edo territory and establishes a new dynasty that would last over 700 years. This is the beginning of the Benin Empire as we know it. By the 1200s, Oba Eweka I takes the throne. He rules for 35 years. He creates the foundation for everything that comes after. But it's his successor who really sets things in motion. The year is 1280. Oba Ogwola becomes king. He sees enemies all around, He knows Benin needs protection, so he does something remarkable. He orders the construction of the first defensive moats around the city. Not just one, 20 separate moat systems surrounding Benin City. Miles and miles of earthworks, engineering on a massive scale. But Oba Ogwola doesn't stop there. He understands something crucial. A great civilization needs great art. So in the 1280s, he encourages the organization of bronze casting guilds. He brings together the most skilled artisans. He gives them royal patronage. He tells them to create art that will preserve Benin's history forever. This is the birth of Benin bronzes. The birth of an artistic tradition so advanced it would shock the world 600 years later. Think about this. While Europe struggled with feudalism and constant warfare, Benin organized skilled artisan guilds, a sign of advanced civilization. While European kings hoarded gold for themselves, Benin kings invested in artists and craftsmen. They understood something Europe didn't, that culture and art are the true measures of a nation's greatness. Now let's talk about Benin's location. This wasn't random. This was strategic genius. Benin City sits in what we now call Nigeria, right in the heart of the West African forest. But more importantly, it sits on major trade routes that connect the Sahara Desert to the Atlantic Ocean, routes that carry ivory palm oil, pepper gold, and enslaved people from the interior to the coast. Benin doesn't just sit on these routes. Benin controls them. Every trader who wants to move goods through this region has to pay taxes to Benin. Every merchant who wants to buy ivory or pepper has to buy from Benin first. The Oba has a monopoly on all high-value trade. Foreign merchants can't just walk into Benin City and do business. They have to negotiate with the royal court. They have to follow Benin's rules. This isn't luck. This is strategy. Benin controls commerce, like Wall Street controls finance today, and the wealth. The incredible wealth. Imagine a city where the royal palace is so large it takes a day to walk through it, where the main streets are 120 feet wide, where homes have walls plastered so smooth they shine like glass, where bronze sculptures decorate every important building, where guilds of specialized craftsmen create ivory carvings, wooden sculptures, brass works, and textiles that traders come from across the world to buy. But Benin isn't just about wealth. It's about organization. It's about culture. The society is complex. There's a sophisticated political system, with the Oba at the top, then nobles, then guild leaders, then craftsmen, then farmers. Everyone has a role. Everyone has a place. The guilds are particularly important. There are guilds for ivory carvers, guilds for bronze casters, guilds for woodworkers, guilds for traders. Each guild has its own hierarchy, its own training system, its own secrets. The Obas aren't just political leaders, they're spiritual leaders too. They connect the physical world to the world of ancestors. When an Oba dies, bronze heads are cast to honor him. These heads are placed on ancestral altars. They serve as connections between the living and the dead. This is deep spiritual technology. This is understanding that history and memory are sacred. And the architecture, the engineering. Benin City has an underground drainage system in the 1400s. While European cities dump sewage in the streets, Benin has engineered water management. The city walls eventually stretch 16,000 kilometers when you include all the outer earthworks. To put that in perspective, that's longer than the Great Wall of China. But you never learned that in school, did you? You learned about the Great Wall. You learned about Rome. But nobody taught you about Benin. This wasn't a tribe. This was a civilization with urban planning, specialized labor, and complex governance. This was a nation that would eventually trade as equals with European powers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to meet the 5 warrior kings who made Benin into an empire. The year is 1440. A prince named Iwar fights his way to power. His story is controversial. Some say he burned part of the city during his rise. But what's not controversial is what he does after he takes the throne. Oba Ewuar the Great becomes the most important ruler in Benin history. He's the first of 5 great warrior kings, and he transforms everything. Ewuar looks at Benin and sees potential. He sees a kingdom that could become an empire, so he creates a professional army, not farmers who fight part-time, full-time soldiers trained for war. He uses this army to conquer neighboring territories. One by one, small kingdoms fall to Benin. The empire expands. The wealth grows. But Ewuar isn't just a conqueror. He's a builder. He reconstructs Benin City. He expands the royal palace. He establishes new rituals and ceremonies. He introduces coral beads as royal regalia. He makes deep red cloth, called ododo, the official color of Benin royalty. He creates the festival of Yugi Iwer, which celebrates his reign. He's building more than an empire. He's building a national identity. And those walls. Iwar extends the city walls to eventually encompass 3,200 kilometers. This is one of the largest construction projects in human history. Thousands of workers moving earth, creating moats, building ramparts, creating a defensive system so massive it would protect Benin for hundreds of years. Oba Ewuar transforms Benin from a kingdom to an empire. He's the reason we speak of Benin greatness. Without him, there's no golden age. Without him, there's no story. He rules until 1473, and when he dies, his legacy is secure. He's remembered as the greatest Oba who ever lived. But his son is pretty remarkable too. Between 1480 and 1504, Oba Ozolua sits on the throne. History calls him Ozolua, the Conqueror, and for good reason. This man wins over 200 battles. Not fights, not skirmishes, battles. Full military campaigns with armies and strategies and casualties. 200 victories. Think about that. A black African king winning 200 military campaigns. But you never learned about him in school. You learned about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, all European conquerors. But nobody taught you about Ozolua the Conqueror. Ozolua expands Benin's territory through military might. He defeats rival kingdoms. He brings more and more land under Benin control. He uses the army to control trade routes, to crush competitors, to make Benin the undisputed power in the region. Under Ozolua, Benin becomes a military superpower. Nobody dares challenge them. Nobody can defeat them. Benin is at the height of its military power. 200 battles won, not fought, won. This man is a military genius, a black Napoleon before Napoleon was born. And when Ozolua dies in 1504, his son inherits an empire at its peak. But this son faces a new challenge: Europeans. The year is 1485. Portuguese ships arrive on the West African coast. They're looking for trade. They're looking for gold and pepper and ivory. They hear about Benin. They hear about the wealth. They hear about the powerful Oba. So they send representatives. They want to establish trade relationships. But here's what's important. They want in. And Benin says no. Well, not exactly no. Benin says you can trade, but you can't enter our city. You stay on the coast. You don't get to see our capital. You don't get to see our wealth. You don't get to learn our secrets. This is when Oba Esigi rules, from 1504 to 1550. He's the first Oba to deal directly with Europeans, and he plays the game brilliantly. He allows Portuguese traders to operate on the coast. He sells them ivory and pepper. He even establishes diplomatic relations. There are reports of envoys traveling between Benin and Portugal. But ACG never lets them control anything. He never gives them power. He never lets them into the heart of Benin. ACG also encourages ivory and wood carving. He knows Europeans love African art, so he increases production. More guild workers. More ivory tusks carved with intricate designs. More profit. But always on Benin's terms. He plays chess with European powers, and he wins. He keeps Benin's sovereignty intact for another 350 years. That's the brilliance of ACG. He engages with Europe without being colonized by Europe. He trades without being dominated. He profits without being controlled. From 1550 to 1578, Oba Orhogbua takes Benin to its greatest territorial extent. This is the peak, the absolute height of Benin power. Orhogbua expands the empire in every direction, to the east all the way to the Niger River, to the west reaching territories in what we now call Ghana. Thousands of kilometers of territory, multiple ethnic groups, dozens of tributaries paying taxes to Benin. Benin becomes the largest commercial power in West Africa. Trade flows through Benin City from every direction. Caravans arrive daily. Ships dock at coastal ports. Wealth pours into the royal treasury. The Oba's palace overflows with ivory, bronze, gold textiles and tribute from vassal states. At its peak, Benin Empire rivals any European power. France, Spain, England. None of them control this much territory in Africa. None of them have this much wealth. None of them have this much power. This is the height. Benin is unstoppable. But empires are hard to maintain. And after Orhogbua dies in 1578, cracks begin to show. Oba Ehengbuda rules from 1578 to 1606. He's the last of the 5 great warrior kings. But his challenge is different. He doesn't need to expand. He needs to hold. Local chiefs in distant territories are getting restless. They see how far away they are from Benin City. They think maybe they can break away. Maybe they can stop paying tribute. Maybe they can rule themselves. Ehengbuda faces rebellions, internal conflicts, challenges to his authority. He uses military force to crush these rebellions. He keeps the empire together through strength. But it's exhausting. It's expensive. And after Ehengbuda dies in 1606, Benin begins a slow decline. The empire starts to shrink. Outlying territories break away. The golden age ends. But even in decline, Benin remains powerful. Even weakened, Benin remains independent. The bronze tradition continues. The royal court continues. The culture continues. For another 291 years, Benin endures. Until 1897. Until the British come with guns and fire. But before we get to that tragedy, you need to understand the bronzes themselves. Because these aren't just art, these are proof. Proof that everything they taught you about Africa was a lie. The technique is called lost wax casting. It's been used in Benin since the 13th century. The oldest surviving Benin bronze sculptures date back to the 1200s. According to tradition, the son of the Oni of Ife came to Benin and taught local artisans the technique. But Benin craftsmen didn't just learn it, they perfected it. They took it to levels that European metalsmiths couldn't match. Here's how it works. First, you sculpt the figure you want in beeswax. Every detail, every feature. Then you cover the wax sculpture in clay. Multiple layers. You leave a small hole. Then you heat it. The wax melts and runs out through the hole. Now you have a hollow clay mold with empty space where the wax was. You pour molten bronze into that space. You wait for it to cool. Then you break the clay mold, and inside is your bronze sculpture. Perfect, detailed, permanent. Sounds simple, right? It's not. This process requires incredible skill. You need to understand chemistry. You need to know exactly what temperature to heat the bronze. Too hot, and it won't flow right. Too cool and it won't fill the mold. You need to understand metallurgy. What ratio of copper to tin creates the best bronze? You need artistic skill to sculpt the original wax model. And you need patience. The whole process can take weeks or months for a single piece. But here's what's truly remarkable. Benin artisans could cast bronze plaques only 3 millimeters thick. 3 millimeters, thinner than most coins. European Renaissance masters couldn't cast bronze that thin. They didn't have the skill. They didn't have the knowledge. Benin did this 300 years before Europe's Renaissance. Let that sink in. African artisans in the 1200s had metallurgical skills beyond European masters in the 1500s. This wasn't luck. This was mastery, African genius in metal form. And the descendants of these artisans still honor the man who brought this art to Benin. They still venerate Igwe Iga, the legendary figure who introduced bronze casting. This is cultural continuity. This is respect for ancestors and tradition. This is civilization. Now let's talk about what they created. The bronzes fall into several categories. First, altar heads. These are cast bronze heads that commemorate dead obas and queen mothers. When an oba dies, a bronze head is cast in his image. This head is placed on an ancestral altar. It serves as a connection point between the living and the dead. These aren't just sculptures. These are spiritual technology. These are ancestors made physical. Second, relief plaques. These are flat bronze panels covered with detailed scenes, battles, ceremonies, royal processions, diplomatic meetings. These plaques decorated the wooden pillars and walls of the Oba's palace. They were historical records, visual documentation of important events. If you wanted to know what happened during a particular Oba's reign, you looked at the plaques. This is how Benin preserved its history. Third, royal regalia. Bronze bracelets worn by the Oba. Bronze bells used in ceremonies. Ceremonial swords with bronze handles. All of these mark the Oba's divine authority. Only royalty could own such objects. The bronze itself was considered sacred, a connection between earth and spirit. Fourth, ivory carvings. Not bronze, but equally important. Elaborate ivory masks. Ivory tusks carved with intricate scenes. Ivory altarpieces. The ivory trade made Benin rich, but Benin artisans also transformed ivory into art. Fifth, carved boxes and containers, used to store royal items. Even the containers for sacred objects were works of art. The artistic style is unique, more naturalistic than most African art from that period. The bronze surfaces are designed to create contrast between light and metal. Ears, noses, and lips are often enlarged for emphasis, but the craftsmanship is meticulous, every detail carefully rendered. These aren't crude. These aren't primitive. These are sophisticated works of art by highly trained professionals. Every piece tells a story. Every sculpture preserves a king. This was Benin's history in bronze. This is how they remembered. This was how they honored the dead and instructed the living. The bronzes weren't decorations. They were sacred objects with deep spiritual meaning. When an Oba died, his bronze head was placed on an ancestral altar. Offerings were made. Prayers were said. The living communicated with the dead through these bronze figures. The plaques recorded victories and ceremonies. They showed the Oba's power. They taught younger generations about their history. They connected past and present. Only royalty could own bronze objects. This was by law, by custom, by sacred tradition. Bronze represented power. Bronze represented connection to the divine. To own bronze was to have authority. So when the British stole the bronzes in 1897, they didn't just steal metal. They stole souls. They stole memory. They stole the sacred connection between Benin and its ancestors. They stole God. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. We still need to talk about how Benin fell, how the British manufactured a reason to attack, how they committed genocide and called it justice. That story is next, and it will make your blood boil. The year is 1896. The British Empire is hungry. Hungry for land, hungry for oil, hungry for control. And now, its eyes lock on Benin. For centuries, Benin has controlled its own trade. No European power has been allowed to dictate terms inside Benin City. Foreign traders stay at the coast. They do not enter the royal capital without permission. They do not see the full extent of Benin's wealth. They do not touch the sacred bronzes. That independence becomes a problem for an empire that believes it has the right to rule the world. By the late 19th century, Britain is building what it calls the Niger Coast Protectorate along the southern coast of what is now Nigeria. British officials want direct access to palm oil, ivory, and other resources flowing through Benin's territory. They are frustrated that the Oba will not open the kingdom fully to their control. They call Benin obstructionist. They decide something must be done. So in December 1896, a British official named James Robert Phillips sends a letter to his superiors. In that letter, he lays out a plan. He suggests marching on Benin City. He suggests removing the Oba from power. He suggests seizing control of the kingdom's trade. He even mentions how the costs of such an expedition could be covered. How? By selling Benin's royal treasures. Think about that for a moment. Before they ever fire a shot, before they ever step into Benin City, they are already planning to pay for the invasion by selling the bronzes. This is not a tragic misunderstanding. This is not a spontaneous response. This is premeditated theft. Despite warnings, Phillips organizes what he calls a peaceful mission. He sets out for Benin City in late 1896 with a small group of British officials, African porters, and guides. But the timing is a problem. Inside Benin, the Oba is preparing for an important religious ceremony. During such rituals, the law forbids the Oba from receiving foreign visitors. The chiefs send word to Phillips. They tell him to wait. They tell him this is the wrong time. They tell him it is dangerous to come now. Phillips ignores them. On January 4th, 1897, near a village called Ugbain, just outside Benin territory, chiefs loyal to the Oba organize an attack. They ambush the British party on the road. Gunfire erupts. When it is over, almost the entire British delegation is dead, including Phillips. A few survivors escape. They rush back to the coast with a story that will be used to justify what comes next. The British now have their excuse. They call it a punitive expedition. Sounds clinical, sounds official, sounds like a simple punishment for a single ambush. But what they unleash in February 1897 is not a punishment. It is a full-scale invasion designed to destroy a civilization. Rear Admiral Harry Rawson is placed in command. He assembles a force of around 1,200 men, including British officers and African soldiers under British command. They gather at coastal staging points. They load artillery. They bring Maxim guns. They prepare to march inland toward Benin City. As they advance, they burn villages along the route. They kill anyone who resists. They shoot people who flee. They are not just targeting warriors. They are terrorizing the population. All of this is described later in reports and diaries. The mission is clear. Break Benin, break its people, break its spirit. When they reach Benin City in February 1897, they find a capital that has stood for centuries. Palaces, courtyards, tree-lined avenues, altars filled with bronzes and ivories, underground drainage systems. Everything you heard about before, everything your ancestors built, and then they start to destroy it. They shell parts of the city. They set buildings on fire, flames spread, roofs collapse, homes burn, men, women, and children run for their lives. The air fills with smoke, the smell of burning wood, burning thatch, burning history. The royal palace, the heart of Benin, is looted and then torched. The earthworks that took generations to build are scarred and broken. In the span of about a week, a city that impressed Dutch and Portuguese visitors is turned into ruins. The official reports describe this coldly. They say the town was destroyed. They say resistance was overcome. They say the objective was accomplished. But think about what that means in real human terms. This is not just a military target. This is a living city. This is the spiritual center of a people. This is where your ancestors worshipped, traded, married, celebrated, mourned. And now it is gone, burned to the ground. And while the city burns, the looting begins. British officers and soldiers move through the palace, through temples, through courtyards, through private chambers. They strip altars of their bronze heads. They rip plaques off palace pillars. They yank ivory tusks from their stands. They take ceremonial swords, bells, bracelets, masks. They grab anything that looks valuable, anything that looks sacred, anything that can be sold. Estimates vary, but historians agree that somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 objects are taken from Benin that week. Heads of obas and queen mothers, bronze plaques, ivory carvings, bells, boxes, scepters, personal regalia. Some items are kept together and catalogued. Many are simply grabbed as spoils by individual officers. The stolen objects are brought back to the coast. They are loaded onto ships. They cross the same ocean where so many Africans died during the slave trade. But this time the cargo is not human bodies in chains. It is the physical memory of a kingdom. The faces of kings, the stories cast in metal, the soul of Benin. When these bronzes arrive in London, something interesting happens. European experts examine them, and they are stunned. They cannot believe what they are seeing. The level of skill, the thinness of the casting, the naturalistic faces, the complex compositions. They look at the bronzes and admit privately that these are works of genius. But publicly, many of them refuse to credit African artisans. They claim the techniques must have been imported from Europe. Some say Portuguese traders taught Benin how to cast metal. They cling to the lie that Africa could not have produced such art on its own. At the same time, the British government decides to use the bronzes to cover the costs of the invasion. Many pieces are auctioned off. Some go to private collectors. Some go to museums in Britain, Germany, and other European countries. The British Museum acquires hundreds. The Ethnological Museum in Berlin acquires hundreds more. Other pieces end up in museums in Vienna, Paris, and later in the United States. The soldiers who looted Benin often keep a few pieces as personal trophies. These pieces sit on mantels in English homes. They are passed down through families. They are eventually donated or sold to museums. And throughout this entire process, one thing never happens. Nobody asks the people of Benin for permission. Nobody pays compensation for the destruction of their city. Nobody considers that these objects were sacred, not commodities. So in just over a week, an empire that took centuries to build is reduced to ash. Its sacred art is scattered across the world. Its king, Oba Ovon Ramwen, is forced to flee. He is later captured, brought before British authorities, exiled far away from his homeland. He dies in foreign soil. The kingdom is absorbed into the British Empire. The people of Benin are placed under colonial rule. And the rest of the world is told very little about what really happened. They call it a punitive expedition. They call it the suppression of a barbaric kingdom. They call it progress. But you and your family live with the consequences. You live with the loss of an empire. the loss of wealth, the loss of heritage, the loss of a story that should have been your foundation. Now here is where things get even deeper, because Benin was not the only African civilization treated this way. It was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a strategy, a system designed to destroy black wealth, erase black excellence, and keep black people in a permanent state of dispossession. Once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it, and you will begin to understand why the wealth gap exists today, why your family rents instead of owns, why your neighborhood has fewer resources. It all connects. So let us zoom out. Let us move from one empire to a whole continent. Let us look at the pattern. Across West Africa, powerful kingdoms rose, flourished, and then faced the same fate. Not by accident, by design. Take the kingdom of Alada, in what is now Benin and Togo. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Alada was a major coastal state. It controlled key routes between the interior and the Atlantic. It collected duties on trade. It held regional influence. Then came centuries of competition warfare, and finally subjugation. Its power was broken, its story pushed to the margins. Look at Wida, also called Hueda, on the same coast. In the late 17th century, Wida was one of the busiest slave trading ports in West Africa. It built power and wealth by controlling who could access the coast. It had enough resources to field mercenaries for war. But by the early 18th century, Wida was conquered by the expanding kingdom of Dahomey, another black empire consuming its neighbor. And then later, Europeans would consume them all through colonization. Consider Dahomey itself. It rose in the 17th and 18th centuries as a centralized kingdom with a powerful army. It controlled inland routes. It negotiated with European powers. It fielded regiments of women warriors. But in the 19th century, it too fell under French colonial rule. Its wealth extracted, its royal objects removed, its history stripped down to a few caricatures. Or think about the city of If. Long before Benin Ifi produced naturalistic brass and terracotta heads that show incredible artistic skill. These works date from the 12th to 15th centuries. When Europeans first saw them in the 20th century, they were shocked. The sculptures looked so refined that some European scholars claimed they must have been influenced by classical Greece. Again, the same pattern. Confronted with evidence of African genius, they try to attribute it to someone else. This is not random. This is a script. Step 1. A black kingdom or city builds wealth and power. It controls trade routes. It develops art and architecture. It has complex governance. Step 2. European powers take notice. They want the resources. They want the strategic location. They want the trade routes. But they do not want to negotiate as equals. They want control. Step 3. They search for a pretext. They highlight any internal violence, any ritual they can label barbaric, any resistance they can portray as aggression. They publish reports. They shape public opinion. They claim they must intervene to bring civilization. Step 4. They send a military force. They destroy key cities. They kill resistors. They capture or exile leaders. They break the political backbone of the kingdom. Step 5. They loot everything they can carry: gold, ivory, art, sacred objects. They take these items back to Europe. They put them in museums or private collections. They sell some to cover the costs of the invasion. They never compensate the people they robbed. Step 6. They rewrite the story. They erase the kingdom's achievements from textbooks. They exaggerate any practice they can condemn. They frame themselves as heroes. They frame the victims as savages. They call colonization progress. Step 7. They maintain this version of history for generations. They teach it in schools. They show it in films. They present it in museum labels. and they pass laws that make it almost impossible to return what they stole. That is the pattern. Build, threaten white supremacy, destroy, steal, erase, deny, repeat. In Benin's case, this pattern is especially clear. The physical destruction was obvious. The city burned, the palace in ruins, the walls broken, the drainage systems damaged, the population traumatized, houses gone, shrines destroyed, entire neighborhoods wiped out. The theft was obvious. Thousands of bronzes and ivories carried off, sold and scattered, locked behind glass in London, Berlin, Vienna, New York, or sitting on mantels in homes that never knew hunger. But the suppression went even deeper. First, the physical destruction. When they burned the palace, they were not just destroying a building. They were burning records. The royal court kept oral and material records of history. The plaques on the palace pillars told the story of past rulers. The bronzes marked lineages. The ivory tusks recorded events. Destroying the palace was like burning a national archive. It was like erasing a library. It was cultural arson. They also damaged the earthworks and city layout. The walls and moats that had once been called one of the largest earthworks in the world were cut-filled or neglected. What remained was eventually overgrown. Without maintenance, the physical proof of Benin's grandeur faded from view. If you visited decades later, you might not see the scale. You would not know how impressive it once was. Second, the legal suppression. After the invasion, the British declared Benin part of their protectorate. They imposed their laws. They removed the Oba's political power. Traditional governance was undermined. Colonial officials became the ultimate authority. This meant the people who destroyed Benin now controlled the legal framework over Benin's land and heritage. Even in the 20th century, when some objects from Benin came up for sale or donation, Western laws shielded the holders. Museum statutes in places like Britain made collections inalienable. That meant objects could not be easily removed or given back. Laws built by the same empire that stole the art now prevented returning it. The thief wrote the rules. In recent years, another legal twist has appeared. Within Nigeria, there have been disputes over who legally owns the bronzes that might be returned. Is it the federal government, the state of Edo, the royal palace of the Oba? In 2023, Nigerian authorities said the Oba is the rightful owner, but the confusion has already slowed down restitution efforts, a divide and delay tactic, whether intentional or not. Third, the educational erasure. For over a century, most schoolchildren in Europe and America never heard the words Benin Empire. They did not learn about its walls, its bronzes, its trade networks. Instead, they saw Africa presented as a place of tribes and villages, a place without history, without architecture, without technology. Even when Benin was mentioned, the language was twisted. The 1897 invasion was called a punitive expedition. That phrase hides the reality. It sounds like a small police action, not the destruction of a capital city, not the killing of civilians, not cultural annihilation. The violence is sanitized. The art itself was labeled as primitive art or tribal art in museums. That phrase does something to the mind. It suggests simplicity. It suggests lack of sophistication. It does not prepare you to see thin cast bronzes that rival or surpass European works. It sets an expectation of inferiority, so when a viewer sees brilliance, it feels like an exception, not evidence of systemic African excellence. Fourth, the media manipulation. In British newspapers around 1897, the story was framed to justify the invasion. Reports emphasized human sacrifice at Benin's court. They played up the ambush of Philips as an unprovoked massacre. They used words like savage, barbaric, and heathen. They presented the British as agents of order, as liberators, as bearers of civilization. This framing shaped public opinion. It made it easier for people in London to walk into a museum, see Benin bronzes, and feel no guilt. They could tell themselves these objects were rescued from a cruel king, saved from destruction. They could ignore the destruction their own government caused. Behind all of this is a deeper strategy. If you erase the memory of what was stolen, you weaken the case for giving it back. If you convince generations that Africa had no great civilizations, then talk of restitution sounds strange. You can only demand back what you know you had. If you never hear about Benin's wealth, you are less likely to feel entitled to its return. So for decades, black children in America learned about slavery. They learned about chains and fields and whips. But they did not learn about the royal courts of Benin. They did not learn about Ozolua the Conqueror or Ewer the Great. They did not learn that their ancestors built cities with drainage systems when European cities were drowning in their own waste. They did not learn their starting point was empire. And that has consequences. Because if you think your history starts with slavery, you internalize a lie. You start to believe that your people were always at the bottom, that they never ruled, that they never built anything lasting, that they never had wealth, that they never had art beyond masks in some rural hut. That lie makes it easier to accept inequality. It makes it easier to accept poverty. It makes it easier to believe that the wealth gap is about culture, not theft. So we have to ask, how does this connect to now? To you, to your family, to your bank account, to your neighborhood. Let's talk about money. In the United States today, the median white household has around $188,000 in wealth. The median black household has around $24,000. That is almost an 8-to-1 gap. 8-to-1, same country, same time, same economy, but massively different outcomes. You have been told many stories to explain that. Maybe you have heard that black people do not save enough, or that they do not invest, or that they make bad choices. But when you look at history, a different story emerges. For 400 years, Europe and later America extracted wealth from Africa and from African bodies, through slavery, through colonialism, through looting, through unfair trade. Imagine that extracted wealth as a giant funnel. On one side, you have empires like Benin generating value, producing ivory pepper cloth, art, human labor. On the other side, you have European treasuries companies and families receiving that value. Every time a bronze was stolen and sold, that was wealth taken from an African line. Every time a kingdom's trade routes were seized, that was future profit stolen. Every time a colonial power forced African farmers to grow cash crops at unfair prices, that was another transfer. By some estimates, if you added up the value of labor resources and art removed from Africa over centuries, you would reach figures in the tens of trillions of dollars. Now bring it to the personal level. Imagine if Benin had not been burned in 1897. Imagine if the royal treasury remained intact. Imagine if the bronzes remained in Benin City. Imagine the tourist industry today. Imagine the museums there. Imagine the universities built around this heritage. Imagine the value of having your own Louvre or British Museum in your city. Tourists would fly from all over the world. Hotels, restaurants, guides, vendors would thrive. Jobs, income, intergenerational wealth. Imagine if the trade networks remained under African control. Instead of European companies extracting palm oil and minerals on their terms, African states would have negotiated as equals. That would have meant higher revenues, more public investment, more infrastructure, more schools, more banks, more capital accumulation. Now stretch that imagination across the whole continent. Dozens of Benins, dozens of Dahomies, Dozens of kingdoms that could have evolved into strong modern states with deep reserves of cultural and financial capital. That is what was interrupted. That is what your ancestors were building. That is what was stolen. So when you look at the wealth gap today, do not just see numbers. See history. See burned cities. See looted bronzes in European museums. See plantations in the Americas built with African labor. See banks in London and Paris and New York whose early capital came from slavery and colonialism. When people say black communities are poorer because they do not work hard, remember this. Your ancestors worked harder than almost anyone on this planet. They built empires in Africa. Then they were kidnapped. They built plantations in America. They dug railroads. They mined coal. They laid the foundation of modern economies. They created wealth. The problem is not work ethic. The problem is ownership. They did the work. Someone else owned the product. If Benin had not been destroyed, if the bronzes had not been stolen, if Africa had not been carved up and colonized. Many of the people now struggling in black neighborhoods in the United States would likely descend from families with land businesses and cultural capital. Maybe your mother would not have had to work 2 jobs. Maybe your grandfather would have had property to pass down. Maybe your family would be investing instead of surviving. And this is why the conversation about reparations is not just about slavery in the 18th century. It is about Benin in 1897. It is about colonial policies in the 20th century. It is about the ongoing possession of stolen art in the 21st century. The theft never really stopped. It just changed forms. Now we arrive at a crucial question. What do we do with this truth? What do we demand? What do we ask from history? What do we ask from God? What do we ask from each other? Before we go there, pause for a moment. If this truth is hitting you in your chest right now, if you are feeling that mix of anger and clarity, do something with it. If learning that your ancestors were bronze kings is shaking your old image of Africa, let it show. Take a second. Breathe. If this truth hit you, go down to the comments and type one word. Truth. That is it. Truth. Let others know you are awake. If you are done with the lies, tap that like button. Not for vanity, for visibility. So more people find this history. And if there is someone in your life who still thinks Africa was nothing but huts and poverty, share this with them. Send it to their phone. Tell them you need to watch this all the way through. Because we are not done, not even close. We have exposed the empire. We have exposed the bronzes. We have exposed the pattern of destruction and theft. But there is another layer you need to see. It is about who you are, who your ancestors were, and why, despite everything they did to break you, you are still here. We are about halfway through the most important revelations in this story. Stay with this, because the next truths are not just about what they did. They are about who you are, and once you see that, you will never identify yourself the same way again.